item.
I support that one. Okay,
I think we'll catch up to Jamie when she gets here.
Okay.
Good afternoon again. We will do our pledge and our moment of silence at the regular board meeting, if that's okay with everybody. So could we do a roll call, please?
Commissioner Kramer. Commissioner Orr.
here.
Commissioner Rexroth.
Present.
Chairman Whistle.
Here.
Commissioner Ross.
Here.
Commissioner Elder.
Here.
Commissioner Wagner.
Present.
Thank you. Any public comment this evening? Any commissioner comment?
Go ahead.
Okay,
So
we
commissioner
do.
comment, I would like to have a chance to read those. That's my commissioner comment. Since we just got it.
The purpose of our meeting is to review the municipal employees retirement system, potential county policy. Darcy's here, and Darcy has arranged for us to have the resources of Leah.
Yes.
And Darcy, you want to kick this off?
Sure. Leah is here with us, I guess, this evening, I'd say. Leah is part of our regional team with MERS. Leah is one of the educators. Leah is going to go briefly through the MERS service credit purchase. And then after that time, if you have any questions, we can talk about our next steps. Thanks for being here, Leah.
Yes, you're welcome. And you can hear me okay, right? All right. I kind of last minute was welcome to join your meeting. So one, thank you for having me. And being on the education side, I thought there would be no better way than to kind of explain it through me personally. Service credit purchase. So my employer allows me to purchase service credit. So I go through the process to see how much that would cost me. And of course, as you may be aware, that I can use funds from other qualified accounts. And the cost came out, and it is expensive. I guess that's relative, but it is a costly amount, because the actuaries are going to look at my whole situation and evaluate all the important aspects to, if I were to do this, how can it substantiate that? How can it pay for that? They're really, actuaries are really good at what they do. Eerie how accurate they can hone in on exactly what needs to be honed in on, all the details that need to be factored in. Although the cost of a defined benefit or buying more years is very tricky to nail down. You can't say it's going to be $100 or $150 or $1,000, because all of the assumptions that have to be made to come up with that cost. And therefore, there are many different, I guess, factors that play into this. And we can kind of go through each and every one, but they can't necessarily get it to the exact penny, because the future, I could live longer than the actuarial tables say I could live. I could, so just with that one example, there are many examples that would be impacted. But either way, when I look at the cost for me, myself personally, I just have to evaluate the pros and cons, and is it worth it to me? I ultimately decided that it was too costly for me to purchase the years. And I felt more effective with leaving that pile of money invested in a 457 or a 401k, whatever it may be. In my case, it was in a 457. And therefore, I felt that the tying up my funds in a defined benefit pension, I lose a little bit of my control of that lump sum of money. And when the actuaries are looking at this, they're estimating, so this is the same throughout all of MERS, they're estimating a 6% growth rate, whereas MERS, or my employer, is actually in that fund getting over 6%. Again, for different reasons, I chose not to do it, but there are very detailed actuarial tables that come up with the cost, but we can never really put a total cost on it. Same for me. If I chose to go through with the service credit purchase and the factors didn't work out in my favor, and I didn't, me or my family does get the dollars I've put on the account, but it based on the break even point or how long I live or whatever it may be, to me, buying that service credit was not worth it. Now, that was me going through that process, but you guys probably want to hear about some of the assumptions that MERS, the actuaries, put, I guess, analyzed throughout this whole process. And I'll take a pause here to see what kind of questions are coming up thus far. Any questions or direct questions about the actuarial process?
I guess I think this, myself and the board really, what we're trying to determine is there any, can we be assured that by the purchase of MERS credits by our employees that we will not end up with an unfunded liability situation? And I think what you're telling me is a basic set of assumptions, and that only works if those assumptions are met. If 6% return is there and we have 4 years of bad market, right after then we have an unfunded liability, or if someone's going to live, we expect them to live to be 77 and they live to 86, we have an unfunded liability. So there's basic assumptions you're telling us that are reasonable and accurate as far as, but there's no way to know that for sure that we don't end up in that situation.
You said it perfectly. So besides just the mortality tables, there are a few more assumptions that stop us from or do not allow us to come up with an exact number. So you're exactly right. My reason was to forego the service credit purchase is the idea that, okay, I can do better in an investment somewhere else. And, my employer, when MERS does it, again, we operate as a not-for-profit, they're trying to get to a zero net gain for either the employer or employee. They're trying to come up with the actuarial numbers that put all that cost on the employee. But just as you said, one issue being the mortality rate, there are a few other assumptions that we cannot put an exact cost on that, and no one can say, we can guarantee you that this is the cost. So you're exactly right in your statement. There's no real way to say this is the dollar amount and it will not change.
So along those same lines, Leah, there's a lot of variables that we don't have any control over. We don't know what an employee's intention is in terms of how long they're going to stay employed here, where they're going to go. They may end up leaving here and working for another MERS related organization. And so their pension is going to be extended. And so we will have a liability there, and that liability will grow. So there are some of those components. And I think it is in the recent situation that we had, it puts the staff in a very difficult, if not unfair scenario to say, what's our liability? Because we don't have any way of knowing what a person's intention is. If they're not sharing it with the actuarial, they're not sharing it with us either. So there are some some realities to all this, that the board has options. And I just wanted to, to kind of say this, that if we don't have criteria, and I don't know, Leah, if you could speak to, in your particular situation, does your employer have criteria that says we'll only consider individuals based on certain criteria, or a policy that is established for the board or for your employer to look at or consider?
Yeah, and because this isn't necessarily my role every day, I did discuss these things with Tony. No, you have to be really careful as the employer to not discriminate. So often you can come up with criteria, but it would be, you can choose not to do it, of course. That's hard in this environment today, because unlike me, there are a lot of people who value the idea of, I would rather have my money tied up to earn another $100 in a monthly payment. So there are different employees or the workforce nowadays, at least offering this opportunity is nice for retaining and recruiting. But after discussing it with Tony, the idea that, of course, yes, you can eliminate it, but that would eliminate the choice with those employees throughout Leelanau County. And then you can also do criteria like, we are only going to allow service credit purchases with other governmental employees or military service. So you can choose some type of criteria like that, but otherwise it gets a little difficult to do it by hire date or stuff of we just want to be really careful when we come up with the criteria, and ultimately picking again like governmental employees or service credit, because they were in the military, they can buy service credit. So that being said, I may have to defer to Tony if there was anything else, but after our discussion earlier today, that's about the criteria that we can use.
Commissioner Lutton.
Yes, thank you. I think you just answered my question, but I want to make sure that we understand it even more fully. So governmental service would be coming from another government body anywhere. Does it include schools?
Correct, it does.
Okay, schools, another county, another sheriff's department, maybe state, I don't know. Okay, so and or military, does that include military?
Yeah, or you could include it, or just just choose military. Military would not include the statement in the governmental service, so that was just like another level.
So military is like a separate.
Yeah, because when we talk about like Act 88, that is other governmental employees that are not MERS and the state of Michigan, and it doesn't include any federal military service.
Okay, so then general service is just an employee that wants to buy more years. for
Correct.
some purpose. Okay. Me personally, I've never been opposed to, and maybe this big question is can we write a policy in such a way? I've never been opposed to buying service credit on the front end of an employee. We've had some people coming out of the military, we've hired them in the sheriff's department, et cetera. We've had, I believe they've all been hired on the front end. So we said, yeah, we really would like to have this person as an employee. We'd really like to have this person as a deputy. We'd like to have this person as a corrections officer. So we buy their service credit on the front end, but not after. So once they're an employee, we cannot offer. And then I got one more question. So but we can do it on only the front end.
I would have to verify that. I'm sorry that I don't have that answer for you, but I would have to verify that with Tony, because it appeared that we can't necessarily say, hey, first part of the career, you can do it, second part, no, because that's getting more into age or years of service, whereas we want to break it up with pretty much where he came from. Are you in the military service? Then yes, you could buy it. Or I'm sorry, did I misunderstand that question?
No, I just, that there's a benefit to us, that if we want to, yes, we have this, but it's two kinds, and I would have thought of it saying as military or governmental, but you know, say we're going to steal this corrections officer from another county, and they're gonna say, well, I want you to buy my MERS, I want it all together, whatever, so we say, well, okay, that is our policy, and we wanna move forward. And then is there, once we've bought that, that is it, like, we can't say, well, but, you know.
Yeah, you can't get into picking, I think I get where you're going, is like picking who, you know, and I do want to, like, number one in the calculation assumptions is, I'm just going to kind of read this out, but projected earliest eligible retirement date. So this is one assumption. This date is calculated using the participant's date of birth, the amount of service credit reported by the employer, and other service credit that we have on record. So when we're looking at, you know, individual examples, that would include such as MERS to MERS or Act 88 time. If any of this data is incomplete, so this is kind of stated in all the assumptions, if it's wrong, of course, that can skew things either way. It could either increase or decrease the actual cost. And so MERS to MERS time and Act 88 are figured even for those people you currently have. It's just, unfortunately, they take another, let me see, is it number 3 of the assumptions? It's assumed the participant will continue to work until the earliest date for unreduced retirement benefits unless a specific termination date is shown. Any deviation from the earliest eligible date may increase or decrease the actual cost. So not only can it increase, it can decrease it. That's why that so many, as you stated, we can come up with the cost, but we can't pinpoint it because so many factors are coming into play. But I do want to assure you that if they're giving a cost, they're looking at the fact that they have this many years, or they came from another MERS municipality, or all of the above, all of the information they know about participant in question, they're diving into it.
Commissioner Lagarde.
Well, is Act 88 military?
Act 88 would be other governmental service, so that would be all other Michigan municipalities who are not affiliated with MERS and who adopted Act 88. So they have to adopt it, and the state of Michigan also holds Act 88. So there are a lot of MERS municipalities that didn't choose to adopt Act 88, but they fall under MERS to MERS. You know, in the MERS family, we all fall under the MERS to MERS, but Act 88, you have to adopt as a municipality across the state of Michigan. And the state of Michigan also, again, carries Act 88.
Okay, I'm not really sure why I appreciate this education. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not really sure why we are covering this, because we have allowed our employees to do this for years and years and years. And so is there a proposal to change that? And if so, why? Anytime you take away a benefit that people have seen that others employees enjoy for years and years, this has to be really carefully discussed, considered, feedback from employees. I'm just not sure why we are even talking about changing a very, very long-standing policy that our employees really liked.
Well, I was one that wanted to have this discussion because I think we need to understand the potential, high potential cost of even granting one of these. And I don't want to talk about individual cases, but it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars per person.
Well, why don't we find that out? Because we've done this
So
for
that's what
years.
that's why.
Because
we
we've
have-
done this
You-
for
you-
years.
You know, of hearing the discussion, what it doesn't answer, it doesn't give you all the solutions, but what may be helpful, and I may be speaking out of turn here, but we have history, right? We can look at some of the data historically for Leelanau County, to help give actual data and numbers if you'd like that. We can do some history, but we just can't project into the future, correct? I mean, so that may be useful if I can, rally Tony and our team and come up with some historical, these were a couple service credit purchases and this is what happened the years following. Would that be useful, or is that?
Yeah, I think that would be, and Michelle Crocker is here, and Michelle has been heading this up for many, many years. So do you have something to offer,
Yeah.
Michelle?
Previously, when we used to do this many years ago, the county would pick up the full cost. And they kind of put a halt to it for a little bit. And then around the early 2000, Jim O'Rourke can help me win, probably. The employee has to pay their share based on the cost. The county does not pick that up anymore, and that was a determining factor to do this. And like the representative said, there's so many factors that come into this of what it may or may not cost the county. But it was changed at least 20 years ago, I want to say, because I'm thinking of some specifically that have bought and they have to put it. We've had those purchases range anywhere from some people maybe paying $5,000-6,000 up to some employees, because they've waited till later in their career, up to $60,000 to $80,000 to buy those years. And in some cases, only buying 2 or 3 years, but they see value in it. And when they do this, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch her name. but
Leah,
she'll-
sorry, I don't know if I said it.
Yeah, Leah will correct me if I'm wrong. Whenever you do approve these, two of the lines that are on there, because we also never know when they're gonna retire. Because when an employee puts a potential retirement date on these requests that go in, it can change the amount of money that they have to pay to buy these service credit years. And I've never had anyone that's actually put a date on there. But the form always shows when it comes back to you what the exposure would be pre-purchasing versus after purchasing. So you do always have that ability to know that, but again, it's just that snapshot, because what she was alluding to is you just never know. How are they gonna take their retirement? How long are they gonna live? How long is their beneficiary gonna live? There's just so many variables.
What's the market gonna do for the next 3 years?
Yeah, and those are all questions that, even if we weren't discussing service credit purchase, those are all very valuable or valid points within a defined benefit program.
And when those employees that purchase this, the first money that gets drawn on, is my understanding, is the money that they have used to purchase. That is what gets drawn on first. And also some of our groups, and this is a little off topic, but it's the same. Some of our groups, when they reach a certain age, their benefit goes down. And just so you know, if that is not caught, because I know it happened once, by the MERS, and because they're processing a huge payroll. I mean, even just for us, it's a large, but if it's caught 2 or 3 years after the fact, that employee does have to pay back that overpayment in their MERS payments. It happened to an employee a couple of years ago, and it was due an audit because the spouse passed away. And it's just, MERS is looking out for our benefit because that is money drawn out of our account.
Yeah, and I also want to point out, when it comes to service credit purchases, going back to my example, on one side of it, because of course the service credit purchases can increase and decrease the cost, either or, when we're figuring out these actuarial assumptions. But often an employee putting their own money in the plan. It's not necessarily everybody's money, it's their specific money, but that's helping the plan as a whole too. They're choosing to, tie up their lump sum of money to help fund their own personal defined benefit, but these are assets, so it's helpful, especially if the market's doing well. So there are definitely positives to it, and also allowing employees that option. But again, you'll have employees who go through the whole process and they say, nope, it's not for me.
Is it an overstatement, though, before I pass the torch over here, to say that potential many thousands of dollars liability for the county on any one individual, if we don't consider the projected cost at least on a case-by-case basis?
Potential liability, speaking of, right?
Yeah.
A potential future liability, unfunded liability in the plan.
Yeah, that's not necessarily easy to answer that question. It could be beneficial to the plan to allow the service credit purchases as well. So the hard thing is we can't necessarily look on, I guess, going forward, if we're thinking about every one of these options, we just can't look at every individual and say, yes, you can do it. No, you can't. But yeah, there's a possibility of unfunded liability, but there's also a possibility that these funds are helping the plan too. That's why I really think like a history of looking at past numbers. This is what was projected. These 3 or 4 service credit purchases happened, and probably not necessarily yesterday's, but looking 10 years back, if we have some history there to look at what the trend was, maybe even catching some trends of what your employees are choosing. Maybe more often employees who are veteran, who have been there more years, are purchasing service. We don't see that a lot because the cost is so expensive. But across the state, we have many employers offering the ability to purchase service credit, and we don't see a problem too much.
I know the administrator wants to talk. I just wanted to add this to what she's saying. In part of her hesitancy to answer that question would be the same as mine. And this would be a drastic worst case scenario. For example, let's just say I retired and I drew and I chose the option where I could get my husband to sign off, and I was going to take the maximum. I draw 1 month, I die. It's done. There's no beneficiary. So it's hard to say what are the projected costs because it's all in. I mean, correct, Leah? I mean, you don't know what people are going to draw, what their longevity is going to be. Could there be additional costs? Yes, but.
If you were eligible to retire
Yes,
at age 50
I was.
and you didn't get your husband to decide he wanted to write you off, so assume you lived to the great old age of 85.
Correct.
And your husband lived to 100.
He would pick up, depending on what I signed up for, a certain percentage of it. But the flip side of that story that you just gave is, I did have the option to draw at 50 years old. So you have just saved close to 13 years of MERS retirement that you haven't paid out on me. So I'm not sure who the foolish one is here.
Yeah. And, can I add that it's actually eerie how these actuaries, how they can drill down to know, how long we're living. And of course, they're changing little tweaks here and there of the assumptions. And yes, they have to look at all this year to year. They're really keeping a pulse on this. And that individual who draws at the age of 50 instead of 60 is going to take a smaller payment. So they're very well-versed in coming up with these numbers, including when they give us service credit purchases. Yes, there are things that are out of our control and that we can't exactly pinpoint, but just as the defined benefit unfunded liability, these service credit purchases are also have those instances to them. But when you have an employee, I'm just not necessarily devil's advocate, but the flip side, an employee who is choosing to put money in the plan, the plan is earning like a 7% when they're actually earning a 6%. So there are more funds in there to help this grow. Now, those funds are the employees and their families. So in that situation, if somebody took $40,000 and put it in their plan, the actuaries really weight that differently, because those funds put in there are owned by the employee and their family. So if somebody were to die soon, the dollars that they've put in their own account, including their own contributions, are paid out to somebody, if not an estate or this. So the employer doesn't own the dollars they're putting in there. The employee is just putting dollars in there to help substantiate the majority of their own payment, but also the plan as a whole, especially when, in MERS history, the fund that it goes in makes 7%, where the employees' actuarial costs are figured on 6%. So there's a 1% gain there. So besides the fact that there are things that make it, that we can't necessarily pinpoint the cost, when it comes to service credit purchase, lump sums of money are not always negative.
I guess I just had a question. I mean, the 7% assumption, and how good these guys are at predicting things. It's hard for me to fathom when we went from a $1.2 million unfunded liability to a $5.4 million unfunded liability in a year, which is a market function. And that's a huge chunk of money. And that's where we are right now. And so, those are the things you can't see. I mean, other than planning the things that might work out, but there's no way to say that we don't end up there, which is we are right now.
And that not may, what I'm saying is that may not necessarily be the cost of the service credit purchases. There are other things in the defined benefit plan that the fact we're living longer there, many of the details that are addressed to the defined benefit plan overall, not necessarily the cost. It's not necessarily the cause of these service credit purchases that are causing that.
I'm not saying that, but I mean, just take the hypothetical that, next week, there was $5 million of service credit purchased and the market tanked after that. It's going to add to that unfunded liability. Every time we add a beneficiary, we add to the possibility of an unfunded liability. Every time we add an amount of beneficiary is going to draw, we add to the possibility of an unfunded liability. So it's going to happen, but I mean, we just saw it here in our own county. From almost,
So just to kind of, for everyone's benefit, and to, I think, the question about why are we having this discussion, I think there were two key points that I was hoping that we could get accomplished here today for the board's benefit. One is that while there are actuarials, they cannot possibly cover every option, or we are not going to know what the intent is of every employee in terms of what they plan on, why they're purchasing for this amount or why they're purchasing for that amount. So to put that burden on staff to say, what is our liability, is not a fair statement. So I just want to clarify that. If the board decides that this is a decision that they want to do, and they're willing to accept that liability, then it is that simple. The board then either has the option to say, yes, we will, or no, we won't. So those are the two factors I think that we have to be clear to.
Yes, we will, maybe on one end, if that's an option.
There is criteria, and so I want to just ask Darcy to just share what you have found from other counties that you have reached out to get clarification on what other counties are doing. So that we're not in a vacuum. And so maybe you can share that real quickly.
Absolutely. I reached out to several counties that I could find with the defined benefit like we have. Of those counties, the majority of them may have at one time offered service credit purchase, but no longer do. I found a couple that actually still allow service credit purchases. And I asked, if you do allow service credit purchases, do you have a policy for that? And I had 3 counties send me their policy. One county was a blanket resolution that said any and all service credit purchases will be approved and they don't even need to go to the board. One of them was an approval for military and for governmental service credit only, no generic service credit. And the third one, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what that one was, but I think it was similar. There were 2 of them actually who had blanket.
So there were approximately 10. I'm not sure.
I came about with 10 counties that I
Okay,
compared.
So 10 counties, of those 10 that have the defined benefit program, 3 of them are offering the program. And is that right? 3
There's 4 that I found that
4 are
offer it.
offering, 3 of them have policies or some sort of procedure.
So just, I mean, I assume the ones that don't offer defined benefit is a defined contribution type counties, which.
These counties actually still have a defined benefit for some of their closed groups, much like we have here. But they just said, no, we're not going to deal with service credit purchases.
It's a simple yes or no. I know it's not simple, but I'm just saying, MERS asks us to either say, yes, we will, or no, we won't. And then it's up to us to define how we want to do it. I'm not making a recommendation. I see your face, Gwen. I'm simply saying that for the board to be informed that, so that you know what is involved with it. It's not a recommendation. I'm just letting you know what other entities are or are not.
And that's wonderful legwork. We can look at some of either your region and get you even more data. I believe, I don't think, if we look at it as a group, we can just let you know some of the things that other people are doing. Of course, not name their names, but give you an idea of what's going on. But that's already some great legwork. And on the education side, when I go across the state, it is, half the people will have service credit purchase. A very minimal amount will ask about it, and many people will go through the process and decide not to do it at some points, but some people do. So yeah, we can add more data to that too, if you give us a little bit of time.
Can you provide us with the list of possible restrictions that could be used? I mean, I know I've heard you mention, I just don't know what they all are.
Yeah, absolutely. Like something in writing, maybe an idea of what's going on across the state, just as I think Darcy, right, had already done. So we'll add to that. Great job, Darcy. We'll add to that, and also a written list of the possibilities.
Jim, and then Melinda, and then others that haven't spoken.
Okay. When I started in 1977, we joined up with MERS, and we actually contributed right of our paycheck. And so we took a pay freeze for like 2 or 3 years so the county would pick it up. Now that was a big hit for us, and we weren't making that much at the time. I retired in 2008, and I paid approximately $20,000. I took that $20,000 and I gave it to MERS, right? So they have invested that $20,000, just as the person last week invested $29,000. I've been retired 15 years and I've done very well. I have 4 of my officers that are no longer living. And after this, I went to the federal government, and I retired from Homeland Security after 5 years, working 20 hours a week. And I was already retired, and they came up and said, well, Jim, you have 13 months. You work for the Panama Canal Company Police Division. You want to buy that time? It was an automatic for the federal government. So, and to come today with this form, opt-out form, pardon the expression, it pisses me off.
Melinda?
I would like to, I like what Doug's requested, that MERS look at what our region or whatever, what's being done out there. I'd like to see the policy that's on the front end for military and governmental. We'll see that policy for military or governmental, not general, and see if we can do it on just the front end as an option. Just, I think we should look at that. Maybe, check with our attorneys too. But this all definitely has to come back to us.
Kendall?
Well, look at you. You're taking notes, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess I definitely understand where you're coming from, Jim, but if we need to really know what those salaries mean, and you're saying unfunded liability, I don't know what you mean by that. I mean, I think we need to spell that out a little bit more for us. And if we do need to make something, I think it needs to be a compromise. I really wouldn't like to, like Gwen alluded to, make a big change in our retaining high quality employees. We don't want anybody to do what's gonna deter that, but if we could just get rid of the generic, and that would not be such a huge hit to people, I don't know.
I agree with it, but I was allowed to purchase 4 years, I only purchased 2 years.
Yeah.
And these are people's lives that we're just essentially, it's not just a line item. So I think we need to look at that, like this is their livelihood. And taking away any of that, because something.
How much money has MERS made altogether with all the money that people have chipped in here, the 20,000 or 60,000 from F1? What have you guys made with that? 7%, 5%? I mean,
Then we've
But
had.
are you asking me?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Because I can't answer that question. When we're running, when we operate as a not-for-profit, so when you're saying MERS made, it's really employer or employee. So in a sense, everything that comes back to the employer helps fund every other employee at the county. But this is something where the fees are in there. They're very low when it comes to the fees of running this plan for the employer. And when we're talking about the funding and when the actuarials are figuring this out to the T or not, this is kind of tough to say, but let's use a real world example. If somebody passes early, it's Leelanau County that benefits, not MERS.
And that's what I was going to say. We've had the great fortune of having a lot of our employees live very, very, very long time. So they benefited from maybe that extra.
We could pass a resolution.
Yeah, and when it comes to MERS administering these plans, financial companies do extremely, they're very detailed in making sure they save this lump sum of money to ultimately have it paid out. Our fiduciary responsibility is, we told these retirees they would have a check for the rest of their life, and we're doing everything possible to make sure that happens. And when it comes to a retirement company, a financial company running a retirement, MERS is doing very well in this retirement fund, even in the market we're in. So we're doing this all for our retirees. And of course, we're working with you to come up with the best case scenario. But ultimately, if the employee, lives till they're 107, the plan, as in Leelanau County as a whole, might hurt the cost to the county. But ultimately, if, again, as the first example, if somebody deceases early, the benefit goes back to the county. It's not MERS who's benefiting.
Certainly understand Jim's statement, and I understand Gwen's statement. But I also think that we need to know how we're spending our money, and there may be other ways to support staff that has more impact than not having a policy of paying, allowing people to buy time. I think we need to become educated. I'd like to have some discussion of policy, and I think we can do that. And I think we can maybe even all agree at some point.
I don't.
Can I ask that we break because we have a meeting in 25 minutes?
Yeah, are there any last questions for Leah?
Where are we going with this thing? We're gonna,
Yeah, right now.
I think this was informational because of the recent request, so I think it's just, I would suggest perhaps that we come back to the board with a policy or at least a recommendation in terms of if we decide to continue with, maybe there's an option in terms of looking at some different options, and Leah, I think, can help.
Yes.
with that.
How about coming back not with a policy, but with information about
I want
what
data.
other companies, how counties do?
I don't even just want that, yes, I wanna see the data, I wanna see all the data,
Yeah,
that's what I
see
wanna
the
look at,
policy,
I wanna
yeah.
see all of it and then make a judgment decision.
Sounds good, you can absolutely do that.
Everybody okay with that?
I have a question.
Yes.
And not filtered information, I think all of it.
In the meantime, since I guess the dilemma is right now is that we really don't have a good policy. We have past practice, we don't have policy. Is it fair to put like just a moratorium on any buyouts until we have an answer?
No, that's not fair to the employees.
We were talking a month, maybe, right? How long is it going to be?
That's not fair to our employees.
I suggest that we bring this back to a regular executive board meeting, look at the data that Leah has for us, and then make some decisions about short-term. I don't think we're gonna make a decision right now. I know we can't make a decision right now. We don't want to make a decision right now. But I think we do need to see what other counties are doing. We need to make sure everybody has the opportunity to talk about their view, and we all understand what it costs and what the benefits are and what staff want.
one other thing, some counties are severely in the hole on this, okay? And they are, we're real good as far as the liability of some other counties is terrible. Maybe that's why they opted out.
We're like 5 million. Right now, last audit.
Thank you very much, Leah.
Yeah, and I'll just mention really quick, that's a great point, and that stuff is public knowledge. So you could check after we get the details of at what some areas are doing. You can go check their funding, so that's a great point. Okay, thank you so much, and I will ask you, is there a date you're looking at? Because maybe I could rally Tony and myself to possibly be in person.
We'll work on that later. I don't think we're at a point right now to really look at a date,
Okay.
Thank you.
but thank you.
It's only
Okay, thank you. I
$2.
will work as I'll hurry on my end to get what I.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you.
We're now at the point in our agenda that we can have public comment. Anybody? Yes, Michelle.
I don't have anything written. I didn't plan to come and speak. I do have to agree with Commissioner O'Rourke. It is concerning to come to a special session where you can take action and you have that type of piece of paper in front of you with not a whole lot of prior discussion, actually no prior discussion. When you are comparing MERS from county to county to county, it's not just who has defined benefit. It's also some of the counties have built-in escalation where they get a cost of living or some sort of increase, whether it be a flat dollar amount or a percentage, and that needs to be considered. Most of our retirees, I was probably the only, well, I know I was the only clerk that was able to get, and Commissioner Lautner was on the board. I believe we did it for about 5 or 6 years where the board approved increases to people's MERS, but that was back, I want to say in the 90s, early 2000. And some of those people were afraid to get their check because they might have been drawing $100 a month and all of a sudden it increased to 120. So I cautioned you to be really careful and not put these really strict parameters that you can't just buy general service credit if you're going to allow military and governmental. Your average employees here can't afford to buy this anyway. I mean, it's just certain groups of employees, and some of them have bought it at the beginning of their term here because that's when it's a lot less money. I just think be really careful because not everyone has experience in dealing with MERS, and make sure we are comparing apples to apples to apples. And one thing that Darcy and I have talked about in the past is these discussions are really not good to have when anyone is in front of you, because then it does appear to be a little bit too discriminatory. But I really ask you to use caution if you're not going to allow this in the future. I have a lot of knowledge on the topic. So I'm happy outside of the meeting to answer any questions. I understand your fiduciary responsibility, and especially for the new commissioners, when you see 5,000 unfunded, I get it, but a lot of counties you'd be the envy of if they only had 5,000. Because, or 5 million, I mean, you would still, even 5 million,
Right.
you would still be the envy of them because it is so high, because you know Grand Traverse recently had to bond to make up for their unfunded liability, which, okay, so we bond, so what does it do? It gets us to 100% for one day, because then depending on what that market does, and it depends on all of our different groups, when you look who's closed, who's paying in, who isn't, there's a lot of things in that MERS report that will show you that. Plus, I was just telling Commissioner Lautner when I was sitting over there, we also had a lot more people that became eligible to draw, not because they retired this year, they might have retired a few years ago. So I just ask you to please use caution, have some really good discussions, maybe in more of a work session as opposed to a special session where the train can go off the track a little too quickly. So that's my only comment.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Any commissioner comment?